Hey guys, I'm Doug with D&E in the garage. Today I'm going to be doing part 2 of cooling systems. If you missed the first video on the basics of your vehicle's cooling system, where you're just a little bit rusty, by all means hit that card up in the corner. If not, let's dig into how to diagnose most issues in your cooling system. That is an overheat situation or something similar, right? All right, now cooling system issues are they're kind of the worst. You can't keep driving a vehicle that's overheating. You will cause damage. You know, there are a lot of issues you can kind of ignore for a little bit in vehicles. Overheating, cooling system issues are not on that list. The best place to start is to break it down into 3 categories. There are 3 conditions under which, or 3 situations under which your vehicle can overheat. Either you're overheating all the time, which means it doesn't matter how fast you're going, doesn't matter if you're idling, your vehicle overheats if it is on. You can overheat only when you're moving, which means if you're idling, you're fine, but as soon as you give the engine some work to do, it starts to overheat. The third kind is you only overheat when you're idling, which means if you're driving, you're fine. As long as the vehicle is moving, your vehicle is fine. But as soon as you stop, if you're idling or you're at a stoplight, you begin to overheat. And it's important to separate these 3 things and figure out which one applies to your issue, because they each point to a different component in this system. For instance, if your vehicle only overheats when you are moving, right, which means if you're sitting idle, you're fine, but when you're moving, you begin to overheat, it implies a flow issue, which means your coolant is moving clearly because you're able to cool when you're at low RPMs, but as soon as you kick it into high gear, the engine is producing more heat than the coolant can exchange through the radiator. A lot of times that's a low coolant issue, which means because of a leak or maybe a blown head gasket or some other issue, you've lost coolant in your system and there's air instead of coolant in some part of this. As we covered in that last video, air does not cool nearly as well, gas does not cool nearly as well as liquid does. When checking your coolant, never check coolant in a hot engine. Your engine must be absolutely cold before you check the coolant from the radiator cap. You can take a look at your coolant reservoir whenever you want. They are clear and they usually will have 2 lines, a max fill and a minimum fill line on them. That's how you check those. But pressure, immense pressure builds in this system. If you open the radiator cap on a hot engine, 200 and something degree coolant is going to spray out and scald your face, your hands, get everywhere. Another thing that could be impeding your flow is maybe your radiator has a blockage. Maybe you need to do a radiator flush or replace your radiator. Possibly your water pump is beginning to go. Your water pump is essentially a little turbine that, driven off the engine, spins and moves coolant, and the blades of the turbine or fan inside of your water pump can wear away over time. Maybe if you had an overheat situation, maybe if you had some sort of debris inside your system, it can affect your water pump. So maybe it is pushing enough to cool when your engine is at low RPMs, but it's not pushing enough when you're at higher RPMs. Another issue, if you're overheating all the time, that implies a low coolant issue, a catastrophic issue. All right, maybe your thermostat is stuck closed. All right, that's a good place to start. These thermostats are a spring-operated valve, the gatekeeper of this entire system, and they do fail. Sometimes they fail open, which would mean you have a low temperature situation. I actually have a video on that in my Cherokee. You can check the card in the corner, where my thermostat failed open, so my vehicle never got up to temperature, which is, it will affect your gas mileage. Your thermostat can also fail closed. So if you are always overheating, a good place to start is the thermostat. Now, I am never in favor of throwing parts at a problem. All right, that is what a shoddy mechanic does. Just throwing parts at an issue, hoping that you magically stumble across the right one. But sometimes it is necessary. Now, you can test thermostats, and I am going to do another video on that sometime, but they are an inexpensive part. If you have a situation where your vehicle is overheating all the time, no matter whether you're moving or not, and you've checked your coolant, and you're certain that you have coolant in your system, and you're certain that it's flowing, maybe go ahead and get yourself a new thermostat. Usually they're $5, $10, maybe $15, and they take about 20 minutes to replace. Now, the way you can figure out if your vehicle has coolant flowing, there are a couple ways. The easiest way is wait for your engine to get up to temperature, meaning it's at operating temperature, which is usually going to be the center of your temperature gauge. You can Google what operating temperature is for your vehicle and grab a hold of this top radiator hose. Now be careful, if your engine's up to temperature, everything in this system is going to be hot. So be cautious. But the good thing to do is give it a squeeze. First of all, touch it. If it's not hot, all right, the hot coolant from the engine leaves directly from the engine immediately into this top hose. If your coolant is flowing through the engine, this hose should be hot. Maybe too hot to touch, maybe not, at least warm. And you should be able to hear or feel coolant actually flowing through this top hose up here. So if you suspect that your thermostat is stuck closed, get your engine up to temperature and then grab a hold of this. Again, be careful. Everything in your system is going to be hot. Now, the third situation is when you are only overheating when you're stopped. All right, this happened to me last summer in one of my WJs. I had no idea there was an issue because my commute, I don't stop very much. It's back roads, I just drive. So I don't know when it happened, but at some point the relay for my fan went bad. So what happened was I would drive along fine as long as I was moving air over the radiator in normal driving conditions. Plenty of heat was being exchanged. I never noticed a change in temperature. It was about an 80-degree day. I was on Route 80. I was actually headed to the junkyard with my buddy, and we hit some traffic, some stop-dead traffic, and I see my temperature starting to rise. And then the traffic broke, and we started moving, and it went down, and that's how I knew there was some issue with my fan. Right? It's almost always a fan issue if you're overheating when you are stopped. That means plenty of coolant is being moved to cool the engine at normal operating speeds, operating RPMs, but when you stop, you're not passing enough air over it to transfer the heat effectively. And again, I cover what all that means in the prior video of this series. So sometimes it'll be the fan itself has broken, but more often than not, it'll be the fan relay. I know in WJs, if you own a Jeep Grand Cherokee 99 to 04 WJ, you should be carrying around an extra fan relay. I know I always do, because they go all the time. And if you're on a road trip, if you're away from home, you're stuck. You can't stop at a stoplight. You have to turn the Jeep off. And once the vehicle overheats, it takes a long time for it to cool down. All right, so once you've established which of these three situations your vehicle is experiencing, you can probably narrow it down to which of the components you need to start looking at. The first thing to do whenever you have a cooling issue is check your coolant level. All right, some coolant loss is normal. It can seep out of the hoses, that connect your radiator and your engine. If you have a weak cap or a failing radiator cap, sometimes it can seep around there. Sometimes the line to your coolant reservoir will have a leak. So if your engine is overheating, check your coolant level. If you find that your coolant level is low, you want to take a look at all of these connections, try to figure out where you might be losing coolant. Unfortunately, if you find that you're losing coolant and you can't find a leak, you need to take a look at your head gasket and you need to take a look at your engine oil because oftentimes lost coolant is a symptom of a blown head gasket. The coolant either seeps out around the head gasket or far worse, it seeps into your engine oil. Unfortunately, coolant severely affects the lubricity of engine oil, so if you have coolant down in the bottom of your engine where the engine oil is, there's a very good chance that your main bearings are going to be out of spec and you might have a much bigger issue on your hands. So address a cooling issue right away. You want to figure it out. You don't want to let it go. There are plenty of doomsday situations, blown head gaskets, blown bottom ends, this, that, and the third, but a lot of times you had these connections get old, they corrode. I know on most Jeeps, most vehicles, these are aluminum, your thermostat housing and your water pump, and they get some corrosion built up around where they're held on with hose clamps and they start to seep there. Radiators usually have plastic bottoms, sometimes they crack. Radiator caps go bad, the seals, it'll seep out there. There's an endless number of little places where you can lose coolant. It's probably not a major issue, but you do want to address it. So you've got a situation where you are not cooling at all, whether you're stopped or moving. You want to check your coolant level. If that's fine, you want to check your thermostat. You maybe want to check your radiator to make sure that it is not stopped up. And again, I will do a video on how to do a radiator flush in the very near future. If you are only overheating when you are moving, you again want to look at the flow. Perhaps your radiator is clogged, perhaps your water pump is not actually moving any water or as much water as it should. If you are only overheating when you are stopped, it's almost always your fan. Almost 100%. If it's not a low coolant issue, it's going to be your fan. And that's easy enough to figure out. You turn the vehicle on, you let it run, you let it get up to temperature. If it passes operating temperature and your fan doesn't kick on, well, there you go. You either have a faulty fan or a faulty fan relay. Okay? This again was a somewhat basic overview. If you have any questions on specifically how to diagnose a very specific situation, or you have questions on replacing any of these components, by all means leave it in the comments. You can send me an email directly. I do my best to get back to everyone who asks me a question. As always, hope you found this video entertaining and maybe even useful, knowledgeable. If you did, please hit that like button down below. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.